Pripyat on April 26, 1986. Just 4 kilometers away, Reactor 4 of the Soviet Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded at 1:23 a.m. 36 hours later, Pripyat was a ghost town, radioactive, dangerous, uninhabitable.
If we take the long-term consequences of the Chernobyl disaster, it stands out completely in the 20th century.
Nuclear energy was considered absolutely safe. No one expected anything bad from it.
The disaster in Chernobyl left its mark on world politics and changed many lives forever. During a nighttime safety test in Reactor 4, operator errors and serious design flaws in the reactor made a worst-case scenario real. 2 explosions blew off the heavy cover plate, exposing the core. Graphite ignited and burned for 10 days, sending radioactive material thousands of feet into the air.
The children were playing, the sun was shining, and we just heard that there was a fire somewhere near Chernobyl, which wasn't far from us.
Fire trucks quickly reached the site of the accident, but burning graphite cannot be extinguished with water. A day later, helicopters arrived, dropping dolomite, boron, lead, sand, and clay. But the fire raged for 10 days, releasing large amounts of radioactivity, including long half-life isotopes like cesium-137. As a result, contamination from Chernobyl was about 900 times higher than that caused by the Hiroshima atomic bomb.
The local population was informed very sparsely, if at all. That is the really sad truth behind Chernobyl. So it took 36 hours to evacuate people from the closest city, from Pripyat, and from the surrounding of the nuclear power plant.
On April 27th, the 49,000 residents of Pripyat boarded buses. It was the last time they would see their homes. Only later did it sink in that it was forever. Kyiv is just 140 kilometers from Chernobyl, where Galina Bozhko lived at the time.
We went to work as usual. They didn't say anything. Everyone knew there had been an explosion at the reactor, that there were high levels of radiation in the air and in the water. The deputy department head, who was a party leader, walked through the room saying, "Comrades, don't panic, keep working, everything will be taken care of."
It was not until 48 hours later that Soviet news reports mentioned an accident. No mention of a disaster, no warnings to protect the population.
May 1st was a big deal in the Soviet Union, the famous International Workers' Day. We had flowers, flags, banners. We went out onto the main street, past the stands, waved and greeted. Then it was over, and we went to the park as usual. We weren't afraid. It felt almost like a sense of caution. You could feel the tension. We couldn't really celebrate. We knew something had happened, but we didn't yet understand the danger.
Soon after, the Soviet government expanded the exclusion zone to a 30-kilometer radius around the nuclear power plant. Tens of thousands more people were evacuated, but the government kept this information under wraps. The Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, did not make a public statement about Chernobyl until May 14th. In Europe, the alarm was raised just 2 days after the accident.
Western Europe learned about the disaster from the nuclear power plant in Forsmark in Sweden. So they detected a high level of radioactivity in the air, and it was quite fast understood that it actually came from the Soviet Union. And so they informed the European countries.
Swedish authorities alerted the International Atomic Energy Agency. Fear began to spread. The radioactive cloud spread across large parts of Europe. First Belarus, the Baltic states, and Northern Europe, then moving over Poland, Germany, and Northern Italy. From there to the Balkans and all the way to Turkey. Wherever heavy rain fell, ground contamination levels spiked. In Germany, some playgrounds were closed. Contaminated food was ordered off the shelves, including milk, and people began hoarding iodine tablets.
We still have regions in Europe's forests, for example, which are still pretty badly contaminated. So we can actually see this when hunters have to check their deer they hunted. So wild boars, for example, we can find high levels of radiation.
In East Germany, people heard about the danger from Western media, but authorities kept repeating the Soviet message that life should go on as usual. After 10 days, the 5,000 tons of material dropped onto the reactor had smothered the burning graphite and halted the chain reaction. During this period, radioactivity was very high. Short deployment periods were intended to minimize the risk to the first group of workers, known as liquidators. But of the 600 emergency workers on the first day, 134 had already developed acute radiation sickness.
It was a very diverse group of people. So the Soviet Union back then claimed that most of them were volunteers. Some of them actually were volunteers, but of course we have to take into consideration on what grounds they decided to go there and to help with the situation. So they had no idea about the dangers they were confronted with at the nuclear power plant.
Sergei Mirny returns to the long-abandoned site of the former camp.
This camp was set up on May 1st, 1986 by my friends and colleagues. And in the summer of 1986, I worked here for 35 days as a platoon commander of a radiation reconnaissance unit.
Sergei Mirny's health did not suffer. He was in the zone after the graphite fire had largely been extinguished. During this phase, the liquidators decontaminated the area around the reactor, digging, removing, and clearing debris, demolishing contaminated buildings. As a result, exposure to very high radiation doses was rare. Sergei's unit measured radiation levels and mapped the area. They also identified contaminated sites that then had to be vacated.
It turned out that the ridiculous measurements we had brought with us were rewritten into tables at military headquarters and the governmental commission. They then looked at the numbers and unanimously decided to evacuate this village. There was nothing we could do to help. We could only imagine the uproar that would be raised the next day. That was a major part of the psychological trauma that I suffered from Chernobyl.
While cleanup work was underway, a protective shell was being built around Reactor 4. Construction was finished by the end of November. The damaged reactor was sealed off and temporarily safe.
The word liquidation is a bit of a euphemism. They knew that any attempt at liquidation was doomed. You can't put toothpaste back in the tube. The same applies here.
From 2010 to 2016, an international consortium built a new steel containment structure. It was designed to secure the reactor for up to 100 years. But since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the exclusion zone has become a war zone. In February 2025, a drone struck the protective shell, and repeated blackouts have threatened monitoring systems.
Otherwise, it was a total failure, socially, psychologically, and culturally. The stigmatization of Chernobyl victims and the oppression they have faced affect the victims themselves and society as a whole. This applies to all categories of Chernobyl victims: liquidators, residents, evacuees, and children.
On many levels, children bore the brunt of the Chernobyl aftermath.
My daughter was 3 years old. She was small. We were quite worried because we didn't want the children to get sick. And then in April I found out that we were expecting a baby in December.
Documents show that it actually happened quite often. that they were told that risks are too high, that their child would be born with some deficits, with some disabilities. So they were told to have an abortion.
My appointment was on May 7th. So we went to the hospital together, and my husband left me there. The next day I was discharged, and he came to pick me up. It's been a long time, but I'm still sad that I didn't have more children.
Galina and her daughter were sent to the Sea of Azov to recuperate in late May, like most children from the fallout zone. But many were resettled and never returned to their former homes. Some children began to fall ill. Their parents were distraught.
They actually, at some point, they started to protest and to ask for help for their children. First from the Soviet authorities, but later they also claimed that they would actually go to international organizations and address them with the problems they had.
A few years later, there was a sharp rise in thyroid cancer among children, normally extremely rare. There was no increase in other cancers, but the fear and uncertainty felt by those affected resonated with people around the world.
There's really huge wave of solidarity of normal people in the Western world, so to speak, and not only in the Western world. So also in Eastern Europe, there was a huge solidarity. So when they offered their help, offered to take so-called Chernobyl children for weeks, sometimes even months, to recover in their homes. So this was seen as something really opening up the whole system.
It was not until after the collapse of the Soviet Union, starting in 1991, that international aid began to take effect. About 100,000 affected children went to Northern and Western Europe to recuperate. In Germany alone, over 1,000 Chernobyl aid organizations were established. Starting in the mid-1950s, nuclear power plants began coming online, and with them grew resistance. Not only in Germany, anti-nuclear movements began popping up everywhere. Chernobyl played a very important role for the anti-nuclear movement because it showed that all the fears the movement had repeatedly voiced could actually come true. It showed clearly just how great a danger nuclear energy really poses, and that no safety measures in the world are enough to reliably prevent such an accident. In West Germany, the anti-nuclear movement reached critical mass following Chernobyl. Around 2/3 of the population opposed nuclear energy. The situation escalated at protests in Wackersdorf, Bavaria, when 3 people died and around 400 were injured. Civil disobedience is not a call to violence, says German activist Clara Tempel. It's an important tool. For one thing, it can bring social conflict to light and show that there are people who disagree with what is happening. Acts of civil disobedience also generate widespread public attention. And the third point is that, unlike voting or marching, it involves actively intervening to address an injustice. Chernobyl left a lasting legacy. Italians took a stand against nuclear power. In 1990, the last nuclear power plant there was shut down. And in Germany, conference after conference was held.
Immer unter der Voraussetzung von Sicherheit und Gesundheit des Bürgers zu sehen ist. Wir stehen also angesichts der Chancen und der Risiken nicht nur unseren Mitbürgern gegenüber in der Pflicht, sondern auch in der Verflechtung der Welt, auch in der internationalen Verantwortung.
In the years that followed, one protest after another took place in Germany.
a serious questioning of the use of nuclear energy, of this high-risk technology. So is this really a path we should follow, or is it too dangerous?
Two public figures involved in the 1980s were Joschka Fischer of the environmentalist Green Party and Gerhard Schröder of the center-left Social Democratic Party. Under their leadership, the coalition government decided in 2001 to phase out nuclear power in Germany.
Die klare Entscheidung, die damit verbunden ist, verbunden aber auch mit dem sicheren Betrieb der Anlagen während der vereinbarten Restlaufzeit, wird sicher helfen, diesen tiefgehenden gesellschaftlichen Konflikt zu beenden.
When we talk about the nuclear phase-out, it's important to remember that even though Germany's nuclear power plants have been shut down, which was a real achievement by the anti-nuclear movement, nuclear facilities are still operating in Germany. Transports of uranium are still passing through the country. A nuclear waste repository that is as safe as possible still hasn't been found. And civilian nuclear power is still at risk of being converted for military purposes.
Zivilen Nutzung von Atomkraft auf die militärische Nutzung.
Multiple crises, the wars in Ukraine and in the Middle East, are fueling one energy crisis after another. The calls for nuclear power are back. Suddenly, it again seems like a clean, reliable solution, and the lessons of Chernobyl are being forgotten.
We understand, but I want everyone to be able to understand this, to understand and feel this danger. It's really very scary.
In Chernobyl, nature is reclaiming the abandoned exclusion zone. But it is a nature contaminated by radiation, and people are still trying to make sense of what they experienced there.
People have started to re-evaluate what is truly valuable in life and what isn't. What's precious is what lies deep within you. Relationships with others are what matters. Knowledge and skills too. Having a home is incredibly precious, and right now we're seeing once again just how easily it can be lost.
It is still an ongoing disaster because it's an everyday issue for them, which they have to deal with, they have to live with, and also the health consequences. Of course, that's not over, so it will take a very long time that we can actually say, oh, now we can close this chapter.
Will we ever be able to close this chapter on Chernobyl? What are your thoughts on nuclear power and its dangers? Let us know in the comments.